Good evening, and welcome to Chicago State University Hotline. My name is Dr. Kelly Harris. I'm an Associate Professor of African American Studies here at Chicago State University, and also the Interim Dean of the Honors College. Over the next few weeks, we will be interviewing different people from our university, different scholars and activists and people who are just doing great things, so you can learn more about Chicago State University and encourage you to come to Chicago State University and enroll students at Chicago State University. Tell all your friends and family to come to Chicago State University and see what we have going on the far south side. Today, I am happy to be joined by Dr. Louis Pancho McFarland. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
All right, sociologist. And how long have you been at Chicago State?
I've been at Chicago State 13 full years.
13 years, and you are a full professor.
I'm a full professor.
So for all those out there, what that means is this. That means he's some hot stuff, right? So you have an assistant professor, then you have an associate professor, then you have a full professor. And in order to be a full professor, what did you have to do?
I had to do really well in my job. I had to, so there's three things you have to do: service, teaching, and scholarship.
Right.
And so I had to publish. I published 3 books and a 4th edited volume. I do service to the university and as well as our community, like many of our colleagues do.
Right.
And teach a lot of classes, 4 or 5 classes a semester for 10 years before I became full professor.
Okay, so let's back up. What is your specialty in sociology?
I've looked at a lot of ethnic studies, in particular Chicano studies.
Okay.
And within that Chicano culture, so my single-authored books have been on Chicano rap,
Okay.
Mexican Americans who rap, and in particular about our identity as Mexican Americans, who we believe we are. There's the first one, Chicano rap, gender and violence in the post-industrial barrio. So I'm looking at what are these guys saying about who we are and about violence and about gender, especially about masculinity, and then in the later works more about our identity as indigenous people, as Mexicans, as people who've been in this country for hundreds of years, and this continent for thousands of years. And that led me into, strangely enough, led me into working on food.
Okay.
So I study food, indigenous food, and in particular indigenous food, and I'm part of a large urban ag movement in Black Chicago.
So urban agriculture?
Urban agriculture,
Okay.
Yes. Urban agriculture, sustainability, it really leads to self-determination for working class and people of color. Primarily, like I said, it's primarily in Black Chicago, the south side of Chicago.
The interest in food, whether it's food insecurity, food deserts, what you're talking about, urban agriculture, that has been a developing field, not only for scholars, but there's been a lot of activism around that, probably within, last 25 years or so? Or even longer than that?
I really see the pickup starting in the last 18 to 20 years.
18 to 20 years.
Since we've turned this new millennium, we get a lot of, it's become popular anyway.
Okay.
So you get some celebrity writers like Michael Pollan and some others like that. But people have been struggling around this issue and environmental justice. So it's connected to the environmental justice thing. Our communities are so toxic in many ways. And if you go on the east side of Chicago, you find the waste that dump. If you go into schools on the south side of Chicago, primarily black schools, you're going to find lead in the water, and it's ridiculous how we are. How we have to deal with our environment. Instead of having nice parks and beautiful things like that, we have busted up concrete and vacant lots and incinerators and on and on and on. And so food is a part of that. Our food supply in Chicago, where Chicago State is located, it's bad for us. It's killing us. It's killing us. We talk a lot about things that are harming people of color, especially in the black community, like gun violence. And it's certainly an issue, and you find hundreds of people dying every year. It's ridiculous. There needs to be something done about it. But when you look at the statistic of years of life lost due to a particular phenomenon, gun violence isn't even close to the bad food that we have in our communities. And so in order to build ourselves up as a community, we need to address the environment and food.
I've been using the term called abstract violence. And that deals with not only, I guess, food, but we talk about unemployment,
Yes.
poor health care, lack of education, and so on and so forth. Those things really limit our ability to have a good quality of life.
That's right.
And those things seem to be much more, not that the gun violence isn't the problem, but those things are more, really the roots.
Yeah.
Getting at the really root causes of the problem.
And then the thing about food is it's the most fundamental thing. And I tell my students, I said, I dare you to tell me something you can do more important than feed somebody. Try it. What is more important than food? Maybe water, maybe air,
Right.
probably. But other than that, and you can't really do much about the air quality or the water quality in your own backyard, but you can plant some food and feed people.
Right.
And so it's very fundamental. Every species needs it. So it connects us in a way that other things don't. As indigenous people, we borrow the term from the Lakota people, metakiasin, meaning all our relations. We're connected to everything. And one of the ways we see that is through food. And when you start to go down that rabbit hole of the food thing, you find a lot of other things, like, it connects to so many other things. So the issues that I'm really concerned about are self-determination, say, the ability for our communities to determine their own lives.
So let me ask you,
Yeah.
so going back to this concept of indigenous,
Yes.
we live in a very arrogant society, right? Where we believe that our technological and industrial development means that we have the greatest civilization ever, on the planet. What is it about indigenous development, or what are we missing from indigenous development that gives a lot of fertile ground for us that we can learn from in terms of how to conduct our lives?
Yeah. I think that the thing that's most easy to understand, and I think the most basic, and meaning most fundamental, not that it's simple,
Right.
but the most fundamental issue is that we are animals. And we are part of what we call nature now. We call it nature, that's the label we give it, but we're part of that. And I think indigenous people, those who are place-based people who've been in locale, the same location for hundreds and thousands of years, know this well.
Right.
They know our connectedness to the land and to other species. And so if we can learn that and begin to, and not only learn that theoretically, because theoretically, I like to also say to my students, we can learn all we want about food, but if we're not planting food, then
Right.
it's all theory, it doesn't
That's
do
right.
anything.
Right.
So not only theoretically, but getting into the soil, if we can learn that in that way, that's going to take us a long way towards reconnecting in bigger things. So I mentioned food being that thing that we all need. Well, then it connects us. Then we don't have to talk about race and ethnicity and gender and nationalism and sexuality and all those kinds, because we're connected by our different food ways. And the fact that you need food and that I can learn from you, I've learned a great deal of things about food and about myself from being with people who aren't Chicanos.
And all these other things are social constructs anyway.
They're all made up, and when I look at the history of food and we talk about, this is African food and this is Mesoamerican food, but when we start to look at it, we see that there's been these exchanges and these
Right.
adaptations
Right,
and
right.
adopting and cross-pollination of
There's
ideas.
no pure culture that's never been touched by any other culture.
That's right. And I think the beauty of it is that we begin to see that history, we begin to see, okay, well, what is more Black American than cornbread, maybe.
Right.
There might be some other things, but I'm saying collard greens, some other things. But cornbread is
No,
an
that's
important
right.
one,
Yeah,
right?
it's a staple.
Well, corn grows in the Americas. Corn was
Right.
grown by indigenous Mexican people. So there was an exchange that occurs here. And if we forget those kinds of things, it's easy to say, that person is different than me. But when I'm able to say, well, or what is more Mexican than menudo? Well, menudo isn't anything but spiced up chitlins, ain't it? Right. So it's an exchange. So we get to say, well, you eat chitlins, we call it menudo, we throw some different spices on it.
Right.
So we can begin to see our relationships and our interdependence, and I think we can break down all those social constructs and barriers. So I try to do that in class and in the activist
Interdependence
work.
is a key word.
Interdependence.
It's a key word, because when we're talking about independence, not only people being interdependent on each other, because no individual really is an island, but we're also interdependent on what you're talking about on the environment.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So let's go back even further.
Okay.
where are you from, and how did you get along this path to say you
Okay.
wanted to be, a professor of sociology?
That's some good insight, I imagine, to what I'm saying. So I was born in Illinois, but moved very, very early in my life to Raton, New Mexico. It's a small mountain town in northern New Mexico,
Okay.
on the border of southern Colorado, on Interstate 25. I spent most of my time in Mexican American communities, being Mexican American, and not really understanding necessarily what that meant always, but trying to, like a lot of young people, trying to figure out who we were and what it meant to be a man, but also a Mexican man, and also a Mexican man at the end of the 20th century. And so I think that led to a lot of the writings that I've done. This quest for trying to understand who I am, but also who we are as people. And what I've come to learn is that we, in fact, are indigenous people. And in a really good book by Robert Cintley Rodriguez, he tells a story about an elder who says, if you ever forget you're indigenous, eat a tortilla, because that's corn, made out of corn, and that's 5,000, 6,000 years old plus, and that we are connected to the corn in a way that is very intimate. And so I didn't know that as a kid, though. I didn't know what we were doing. In fact, a lot of the food that we had as Mexican Americans was an embarrassment to us, because it was not
The fast
McDonald's.
food
It
and all
was
that.
It exactly. It wasn't all that cool stuff. And so
you see on television.
we
all
were
that.
eating frijoles, and it was sometimes it wasn't like. It was a little like we wanted to shy away from that, and at the same time we understood our connections to it. But that made us uncomfortable, because what we were being told was that we weren't part of this country fully. We weren't full citizens of this country, and so our food stuff that they were different showed that. It showed that we were different than the hamburger eating people, and things like that, right? So I have a very
Let me stop you for a second.
Go ahead.
So, how do we disrupt this whole idea of these social constructs, but at the same time celebrate the particular cultural experiences that groups have?
That is a thing that I've been working on, trying to figure out for so long. And my colleagues who are, my comrades who are communists, revolutionary communists, really like to talk about the working class.
Right.
And if you don't see your identity primarily as the working class, then you're going to have all these barriers between each other. So if you say, I'm an indigenous Mexican person, or I'm an indigenous African person, then how do you relate to the African and the Mexican, or the person who's not indigenous, whatever? And you're always going to want to prefer your own people, quote unquote own people.
Right.
And I don't think that's necessary. From what I've learned from the Zapatistas in Mexico and their revolution, what they've said, and what other indigenous people who in the United States who I've studied have said, is we can be us. In fact, the Zapatistas say we want to struggle for a world where all worlds fit.
Right.
Un mundo donde caben todos los mundos. Where all worlds fit, and where we can be us and you can be you, and you can be happy being you and we can be happy being us, recognizing there's something fundamental about our humanity.
Mutual respect. Yeah.
Yes, it's simply a mutual respect. So I don't think there has to be because when we think about race versus ethnicity, for example, race is an imposed thing.
Right.
Race was created to divide us, divide the working classes, divide people, white versus black in particular, but also Native and others. It's not real, but ethnicity is real.
Right.
Ethnicity is how we survive that kind of assault on who we are. Right? They say you're black, this is what you are. You're a slave, you come from slaves, whatever. But then if you have your ethnicity and you know who you are, you can say, I am this, and this is who I am. Not what these people say. So when people say you're Hispanic or whatever, no, I'm not Hispanic. That comes from Spain. What we are is indigenous people, and I can show you that I'm an indigenous person.
The term Chicano, where does that come from?
The Chicano is a term that developed as a response to the colonial version of who we are, the white European colonial version of who we are. So they said you're Mexican or you're whatever. No, we're Chicano. That means we're indigenous. That means we're indigenous to this continent. That means that we're not invaders. We're not, these undocumented, illegal people. We sort of created this entire civilization.
Chicano includes who?
Chicano would include people of Mexican descent who have a sort of an indigenous understanding of themselves.
Okay, all right. So back to your background. So, and I'm asking this particular question because I'm sure there are a lot of young men right now in the public school system who probably not even thinking about becoming a professor one day, might not be thinking about these types of issues. And you were that young man at one point,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
You were into other things, right?
Most
You probably weren't a straight A student all the time.
No. No, I did okay.
But now you're a brilliant scholar.
Right.
So,
Right.
At what age did this transformation happen for you? And at what point did you think, you know what, I might want to go to graduate school, I might want to be a professor, or, you know, even college? What?
Well, I'll say this, that there's a lot of very interesting elements to that part of the story. I was always the person in my family that was going to go to college.
Okay.
Not a lot of people in my family went to college before that. I think we had a couple of uncles who had gone to college, and I don't know if anybody had degrees by that time. My couple of cousins ended up having degrees before I did, but I was always the person who was understood to be smart.
Okay. But why was that? What was it?
This is what is interesting. I took to reading very early. I took to topics and conversations that adults were having very early. But I want to say this. I think some of it has to do with my skin color. That I am light-skinned. You understand?
Yeah.
I had opportunities that my friends didn't. Many of my friends didn't get to go to college.
Right.
But I was always, it was very, and you know this too, right? This whole thing of acting white or whatever, people are upset because they know that certain people, based on their skin color, get privileges that other people don't. And so when I was a kid, I was always told, you're going to go to college and you're going to be that guy who's going to be successful. And so it made it easy for me.
You got
my sister didn't get it.
Encouragement.
Many of my cousins didn't get it. Most of my friends didn't get it. I was doing the same dirt as they were doing. Okay? I got in trouble in the same ways that they got in trouble,
Wow.
but always made it out. And I've always had to struggle with that as a quote-unquote biracial person.
Well, that's very interesting because generally when people talk about the color complex, they're generally talking in terms of the Black African American community.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't talk about how it could be in other communities as well, right?
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting because I'm darker, and one of my brothers is my cousin by birth. So, but he grew up as my brother. His mother was, his mother and my aunt were assassinated when he was a baby. He's very light complexion, and he was treated very differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, and throughout, you know, so I got a sense of almost inferiority. You know.
And for me, it was a sense of I don't know what I'm supposed to do here because I am just like my cousins and my sister and all my friends.
Did they recognize it?
Yes, in many cases, yes, and it caused friction and things like that. Certainly with people who didn't know me very well, especially when I went off to college. I come back, oh, he's a college boy and all this kind of stuff. Oh, that caused a lot of problems. But I never felt that way. I never felt the need to do that, and so it was a problem. And I see that, and I really would like to change that, as much as I could. So when I want to represent people like me, so when I go to work and when I go to professional things, I am representing the young people, my friends and family who didn't get a chance. Right? So I dress like them, us. I dress, I have tattoos and earrings and long hair and all that kind of stuff because, and I wear shirts that say this or thing or that because that's what my friends used to do, and you can see me doing this, and you can say, look, you just like that dude.
So you're taking them with you into the classroom, into the conferences.
I'm trying to do that, and I'm trying to remember that, and because I know there are young people out there, like you say, and even in our classrooms, who are struggling with those same things. Kids of color are going through a lot. And there's a lot of people telling them, my kids included, you're not going to amount to anything, and all that. And I'm saying, look at me.
Right.
Product of a single mother, growing up working class and poor, and I know all those struggles and made it. And just because I look a certain way or don't look a certain way has nothing to do with it.
What part did music play in your development?
Music was very important because hip hop was a way of expressing ourselves. It was there in the early days, and I got into hip hop in the early '80s, b-boy and breakdancing, and in the early days it was a thing that the kind of the tough kids did, right? It wasn't about superstardom. It was like the gangsters were breakdancing, and they were
Right.
having battles and stuff like
Right.
that. And so it was all the kids that you wanted to be around anyway, if you were me, and some of us young guys. It's who we looked up to. And so, but then, music is so universal, and the power of, of the beat, and of, there's a great book called The Power of Black Music, and it's so powerful that it's hard to deny. So I get why, why kids like black music. I mean, you can't
Can you
deny
still
it.
break dance?
Not really. I was 50 pounds lighter.
So in the time we have left, why should someone watching this now, a parent, encourage their student to come to Chicago State, or a student come to Chicago State? Not only come to Chicago State, but why choose sociology?
Yeah. Well, I think that we're doing a lot of really good stuff. I think a lot of our faculty are involved in community engagement things that are really very valuable to our community. And I think for the students, though, you get to have somebody like me, somebody like you. So there's so many folks out there who want to be at Chicago State because we believe in that student body and those folks. And I think some of the stories I was telling about who I am, you're going to find a lot of people like me who have similar kinds of stories, not exactly like me, obviously,
right.
but similar kinds of stories. And we can teach about hip hop, and we can teach about food, and we can teach about black politics and health issues that are so important. So it's a great place to be, and that's why I stayed. And that's why I chose Chicago State over Santa Barbara.
That's right.
Santa Barbara.
Because this brother, he can go anywhere.
I can go anywhere. And I said Chicago State's the spot
Chicago State.
because it is Chicago State.
That's right.
It really is.
Well, Dr. McFarland, we are out of time. We have 10 seconds left. Thank you very much. And I'll leave the last goodbye to you.
Get in the soil, get your hands dirty, go to the Green Lots Project.